You are now listening to Comp Corner, brought to you by the law offices of Bradford and Barthel.
What's up? I'm your host and favorite defense attorney, Nasser F. Adil. Welcome to Comp Corner, the only podcast where the workers' compensation community gets legal insights and a few laughs. On every episode, we break down claims, chaos, and the unique joys of our industry, all with a smile. Let's get into it. A quick reminder, this episode does apply for CE credit. In the show notes, you can find the link to the CE credit form or send an email to compcorner@bradfordbarthel.com. That's compcorner@bradfordbarthel.com for a link to the CE credit. On this episode, we are joined by Ms. Sherri Dozier. Sherri is our firm's Director of Client Development and Relations. Sherri and I discuss a wide variety and array of topics, including how her prior career as a waitress actually got her into workers' compensation, Sherri's 2+ decades of experience with DWC audits, the 5 categories auditors go through, FCA to appeal, and Labor Code Section 4650C4 interpretations. Stay tuned as we get to know Sherri a little better in America's very favorite workers' compensation segment, 5 and 5, as Sherri shares personal, regrettable fashion trends and embarrassing Zoom stories. Please email your Comp Corner and podcast questions to Comp Corner. That's compcorner@bradfordbarthel.com. Our email is in the show notes below. Later, we address a hot button topic and the recent Rodriguez case, where the appellate justices disagreed with the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board's Patterson Doctrine. And without further ado, on to our guest, Ms. Sherri Dozier. A massive Comp Corner welcome to our guest, Ms. Sherri Dozier. Sherri is a certified workers' compensation specialist and director of client development and relations here at Bradford and Barthel. How are you, Sherri?
I'm doing great. So glad to be here.
We are happy to have you on. We're excited, in fact. Now, Sherri, how long have you been with Bradford and Barthel?
It's 26 years now.
So you started, 1999-ish? Is that about right?
Started in 99. Yeah. It's been a great run.
Quarter of a century journey. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, Sherri, can you tell us about your history in claims?
Sure. I'll tell you a funny story to start with.
Sure.
I've done a lot of things in my lifetime. So, I started out, I was a waitress for a long period of time while I was going to school. I'm a certified paralegal. I think we talked about that before. And I'm a nurse. But I think my funnest time was a waitress. And while I was a waitress, I worked at a little hometown restaurant. It was Sandy's, and then it became Denny's.
Mhm.
And so a bunch of regulars came in, and we had a bar that was attached to it. And sometimes I worked morning shift, so sometimes they'd have me relieve the bartender for her break. So I went in, and I knew most of the guys in there. And one of the guys started talking to me and asking me if I was still going to school and how I was doing. And I was sharing with him a little bit about, what my goals were and so forth. And he said, "Well, I have a job for you." And I said, "Okay." I'm thinking, okay, I'm not looking for a job. I have a job, right? So he handed me his business card. And I'll just say his name was Frank, and he was a vice president, Fireman's Fund. And I didn't even know what Fireman's Fund was, or I'm thinking, what is this about? So he had his secretary call me and set up an appointment. I thought, okay, well, this will be interesting and fun. I'll go see what this is all about. So I had an interview, and I was hired the same day. And that's my beginning in workers' compensation. Wow. It was Fireman's Fund, and they were a very large company that had actually moved from all over the state, northern and southern, into a claims unit in Rancho Cucamonga. So I learned Rancho Cucamonga too when I started.
The Inland Empire, our friends in the 909, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's awesome. I think thanks for sharing that. It's funny how most of us got into comp, not necessarily dreaming about being in comp as little kids out there. Uh, but it's funny how we all ended up in comp and we appreciated it. And then it doesn't happen through always estimated ways. So we appreciate that story. Now, Sherri, you specialize in helping clients through DWC audits. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Now, what does that entail?
There's a lot of parts to it. You can prepare for an audit, and I think most insurance companies really try to prepare, but sometimes they need a helping hand in that. And since I've actually been helping people since the early 2000s, I've seen a lot of things. And I help clients prepare for what's called a mock audit.
Okay.
And the mock audit is just that I go through 5 different categories that the auditors will go through, and I'll look at their files and I'll share with them the information. For example, maybe they owe compensation and they were unaware of that, or they owe a penalty that they didn't pay. So if we can get those things cleaned up before we have an audit, you may have a hit on your score for not having done it earlier, but you won't have compensation due. And I'll just share compensation due is probably the biggest leader of why an insurance company won't pass the par.
Interesting.
It's other categories are important, but that one I've found through these decades of doing this is really the most critical. And if you can prevent that through a mock audit, then that's the best way to do it. I have other clients that contact me. They're having audit issues, and I'll help them through the circumstances. They tell me what the auditors have said, and I'll give them answers for that. I'll help them find the way out if possible, or I'll tell them the truth. No, that's something you really need to consider conceding because they are correct in what they've told you. I think it's good for clients to know where they stand. The anxiety of an audit, and every client I've ever been with and helped through it, they're very anxious. My honesty is that I'm anxious while I'm helping them. It's the same experience. I want to do the best I can for them, and they really want to pass the audit. So we have the same goal. So we have our nerves together, but it's great to work with people because, first of all, you get to know them in a way that maybe you wouldn't have. Secondly, my goal is if I can help them improve their process, that's my primary thing. So if I have information for them that they maybe didn't think of it that way, or maybe their claims department was not as consistent if they would have liked, the leadership thinks it is, but then when you hear the truth of it, you recognize, we better clean up that part of it. We better put in different processes. So I like the whole process. And then I've actually been down the road with clients where we've gone into a different phase of an audit and it gets a little more stressful. But we look at things in a different light and we find our way through it. And we've really had good successes with our clients.
Now, mock audits, I've heard the phrase, it's kind of like a damage control, right? Kind of see, hey, look, let's see and break down what the exposure could be. Would you kind of use that phrase with the mock audit, or is that inappropriate in your words?
Well, no, actually, it does talk about what you're trying to do. I talk about it saying it's a trial run. Because what I try to do as an auditor is try to be the auditor. What would I see? Doesn't matter how much I like the client or, I'm friendly with them, I know them, and, we can laugh and have fun together on some topics. But I kind of put on a different hat when I'm an auditor and try to think like they think or what I've seen them think like. So I want to uncover the stones that maybe claims people don't necessarily see. They have so much on their plate that they're not looking at the minute details.
And I think what I appreciate that you bring to the table for our firm is you really bring in a second set of eyes. We'll get into that a little later too, but I think, like you said before, when you do these mock audits and actual audits, you are really bringing in a second set of eyes, which is so beneficial and helpful because you're providing the perspective of how another auditor or claims examiner or whoever may be reviewing this file, right? So that's so helpful because it really tells us what a judge or an actual audit would entail. So I think having that experience and wisdom is really second to none.
Well, thanks for that. I'm glad to help people. So if that's, I like the term second set of eyes because that's just what it is. It's a non-biased, evaluation, hoping to bring some light to sometimes a situation that seems, like we can't get out of this. There's no way forward. There's always a way forward.
Mm,
And we may not like the answer, but at least if we can come to terms with what the likelihood is, we can move the case forward. And I know that all of us our attorneys, our clients, that's the main thing we want to achieve. So I'm glad to help with that. I hope I can shine some light.
well, for sure. Now, Sherri, you mentioned 5 categories that auditors go through. Can you share what those 5 categories are?
Sure, compensation due is the
Okay.
first one. And I think it's appropriate that it's number one because that, as I said before, that is the biggest category people
Mm,
can lose an audit on.
interesting.
The second one is the first temporary disability or death benefit. Are they timely on that?
Mm,
The third one is the first permanent disability benefit. Are they timely on that?
okay.
The fourth one has to do with subsequent payments.
Mhm,
It's interesting. You think you're putting yourself in line as an examiner. I mean, I was an examiner for many years with timely payments,
mhm.
and just one day off, and
Yeah.
you can cause a cycle of a disaster. So what
Mm,
the auditors do is they look at a calendar, basically the year of the audits that they're doing, and they go every 14 days. And sometimes we're off on that. So they're going to look at that and they're going to judge whether you've been timely on all of your subsequent payments. And
interesting.
then the final one, I think most people get this right, but sometimes we're not recognizing that we should have changed our benefit notices. And there's a
Mm,
big conversation regarding the Qualified Medical Evaluator QME process
mhm.
that needs to be offered to our applicant injured workers. So if we have the correct language in that, you're going to
Uh,
get a flying colors pass. But if you leave out a sentence, you're going to not prevail on that. And if that
interesting.
becomes a pattern, where all of your notices are wrong in the later parts of claims, that can become a bigger issue for you. So the advice I'd give is you go on the DWC website and they actually have a benefit notice manual. It's
Interesting.
from the year 2016 and you could pretty much copy and paste
Interesting. Okay.
onto. So it's I think it's an easy fix for those who have maybe not caught up with what benefit notices should be. Not to fear, you can always correct it. If you do have something wrong, what I always recommend is you send out an amended benefit notice. Make sure that they
Mm,
get their
nice.
notice. So, for example, in the mock audits, if you've noticed that you didn't do a correct benefit notice, just send it out when you know that it's not correct. Never hesitate, never wait. Just do it as timely as you possibly can.
Oh, that's great wisdom. I think one thing I've heard from clients who've done audits in the past, one of their statements has been, if in doubt, pay it out. But things that you mentioned, like compensation due, as number one. Secondly, first TD or death benefit. Number 3, first PD benefit, including timeliness. 4, subsequent payments. And 5, change of benefit notices. I think once, as from a defense attorney's perspective, when you have clients that follow all of those proper categories, you realize how much more smoothly a case can go when they've properly analyze compensation due first and foremost, figure out the average weekly wages, calculate that based on the right calculation. Then based on that, they determine the indemnity rate, right? They pay it properly. That alone right there really solves so much of a exposure, so much from an exposure perspective, because then you have an applicant or an AA who are like, okay, my client, meaning the applicant, is getting paid at the proper rate. Once that gets determined, guess what? You're going to really reduce the amount of penalties, interest that you can really tack onto a case if you don't do the first thing right. So, is that, would you say, Sherri, with your experience, compensation due is first for a reason?
I think it's a good reason. The whole
Interesting.
nature of the benefit really is to pay the injured worker benefits, and that comes in a variety of forms. But as we're speaking about the audit, the compensation, for any of us is a critical thing. We all have, responsibility. So they need to be able to count on the fact that they have some earnings coming in to help them make their bills, or, to keep their family feeling like, okay, we're going to make it through this. This is a difficult thing, but we'll make it through.
Did you know there is an 8 in 10 chance that the whole person impairment found in your medical legal reports is inaccurate? As a result, benefits are often grossly overpaid, including unjustified life pensions. B&B's AMA Guides Analysis and Rating Department has reviewed tens of thousands of PTP, QME, and AME reports verifying these troubling statistics. The results confirm that 79% of reports misapply the guides to overvalue impairment, 2% undervalue impairment, and the tiny remainder is actually accurate. B&B's experts have decades of experience analyzing physician reports and outlining their shortcomings in applying the guides and legal theories such as Kite and Almaraz Guzman. Our services help prepare parties to cross-examine physicians and draft legal arguments to ensure that the benefits you deliver are correct.
I do want to talk a little bit about wage statement calculation, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please. No, of course. We'd love to hear.
So, wage statement calculation is, as an auditor, there's a lot of auditors who have different approaches on wage statement calculations. You'll ask the audit unit to come in and train you on wage statements, and they're happy to do it.
Right.
And I've been through several trainings with auditors, with clients,
Mhm.
and there's always a little bit of a different approach.
Please tell us.
So one of the things you need to really be concerned with, and I tell this to all our clients, is earning capacity is the key.
Mm.
If you focus on what the actual earning capacity is, you're going to see it in a different light. It isn't to do the wage statement and save the employer a little bit of money. The employer already knows what they pay their client,
Mhm.
their employee, I should say. And so we want to look at not the most you need to pay them, but really what's their earning capacity. And there are a lot of variables in there. There's labor codes that speak to, there's 4 separate categories that speak to how you calculate a wage statement. The first of which is full-time regular. And if a full-time regular person, they're expected to work 5 days a week and at least 40 hours a week. And if they do that, they're in that category. And what I tell people is you need to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say, for example, if you have a couple of weeks that are well below what we would consider their earning capacity because they're full-time regular, you may want to consider in removing those weeks. And I know the auditors remove those weeks because it does not carefully, say what the earning capacity is. It really kind of reduces that earning capacity. There's exceptions to every rule, but that's the way I would think about it, is truly look at what the earning capacity is. The others are different. There's one that is the catch-all, and that fourth method is when all others do not apply, you use the catch-all. And I think the audit unit has a different approach to that than maybe our clients do. The catch-all really, in 2021, 2022, I was in an audit with a client, and they were, doing the wage statements, and they didn't agree with what our claims people said. And they brought in a case law. It's called Grossmont Hospital. Now, Grossmont Hospital is a case law that essentially says, if we were promised a raise and it was in the near proximity of the date of injury, then you need to be considered for that raise, the amount. And the auditors would say, okay, you use the dollar figure, the hourly rate, times the hours worked of the new rate. So they were paid $18 an hour before. They were paid $19 an hour. That was the promised rate. The audit unit would say you use the $19 an hour, and you times that times the hours that they've worked, whether it be overtime hours, you create the overtime rate, or the regular hours, you create it that way. And so that being said, that was fine. But then they got into a situation, and this will take us back a little bit, but I think it's important to say, we used to have a case law, thrifty drugs.
Yeah.
Thrifty Drugs was a case that kind of said a similar thing, but it expanded way too far beyond where Grossmont did. It
Hmm.
actually had an injured worker back in early times getting raises that you would think would be the 2-year rule every 2 years. She had to raise 3 consecutive times. So
Huh.
that by the end of that, she ended up at a max TD rate. It was $68. It was a long time ago, but still at the time, that was how they did it. And how they applied Thrifty was the audit unit said, we're going to take the earnings from the date of the raise forward only, and we'll do the math from that. And Grossmont says, and so that was for years and years they did it that way.
Yeah.
But then using Grossmont, they said we're going to use the new hourly rate times all of the hours. So it's a different philosophy, and Grossmont doesn't really deal with raises. But they, in category 4 of the wage statement calculation, that's one of the things that it's in all other matter, where if you have a raise during the and you don't get a raise after the fact, which Grossmont deals with, but you have a raise during, really the audit unit feels that you should be using the raise times the hours worked because it was the earning capacity. So I've seen it both ways. In the 2021-2022 audit, that was a big category that they were trying to hone into people. And I think the audit unit, and I can understand why, every several years they pick something new that they're going to emphasize. And I think they use prior examples of a lot of claims departments maybe aren't looking at this correctly. So they want to help guide the industry. And I'm going to give them credit for this, guide the industry in doing something that is maybe the correct thing. So what I found fascinating is the most recent audits, Grossmont isn't even mentioned. And that's not the way they're calculating.
Fascinating.
So you just have to really keep on your toes and figure out where they're coming from and know where they used to come from. And I think it's okay to bring it to their attention. What about this? This used to be how you did it, and now you're doing it a different way. So anyways, that's what I wanted to share about that. It's a more complex situation than we may think. But do your
Sure.
best, look at earning capacity. And I think a lot of times you are correct. So don't let them give you a number because they've used a different approach that really maybe isn't a fair calculation of what that injured worker makes.
Oh, what a great answer, Sherri. I think earning capacity from full-time regular, number one, all the way to catch-all. These are things that not only come up in audits, but also in normal claims practice, normal defense attorney practice. For example, hey, when the defense attorney is taking a deposition, right, it's our job to ask about wages, not only, when they got hired, but also at time of injury, also subsequently when they return to work. Because once we know that, then we can also communicate with claims, hey, these are the wages that AA may say that they're trying to get an increase in TD rate because now they're getting paid more than they did 3 years ago at time of the injury. So the communication aspect of what you're saying is huge because same things with what you said about the 5 categories auditors go through, right? After compensation due, guess what? Numbers 2 through 4, 2 through 5, including first TD or death benefit, all the way to first PD benefit and subsequent payments and change of benefit notices. So much of that is the communication that claims and defense counsel have to have, frankly, in order for it to be a successful audit later, but also successful practice in claims administration. What do I mean by that? Well, the 14-day rule, right, that you said. The 14 days, if the defense counsel gets a report and from the PTP and they say, hey, look, claims, here's a report, TD can be stopped. Stop TD, start paying PD. If that gets done early and right away, guess what? We all win, right? So the 14 days, in your experience, Sherri, that's pretty tight timeline. Is that correct with regards to the notices?
It is a tight time frame. Exactly. And I want to bring something up here, if I may. There's a lot of times that I've seen on files, there's a dispute in what the medicals say. You have a PTP saying something, you may have a QME saying something else.
Right.
Unless let's say, for example, your PTP returned someone to work and they didn't find any disability, they found no more TD. And then the QME comes in and they say, no, this person cannot work, they're TD.
Right.
I found that in the industry, a lot of different sources, they're saying, but wait a minute, I have a medical that I can rely on the PTP. And what I'm going to tell you as a perspective of an auditor is each medical needs to be analyzed and looked at for what you may owe. Now,
Okay.
I'll give you an example of what you may do. Is if you have a PTP report, you think it's really solid. It's not just a one pager check the box kind of situation, but it really gives some good information. That doctor knows that patient, treated him for
Mhm.
6 months or whatever, him or her. And then the QME comes in and says, okay, well, they're TD. The QME comes in and saying they're TD based on what the injured worker was saying, and maybe they didn't fully review all the medicals. So
Mm.
in those cases, and we've had some success with that, allowing the PTP to look at the QME medical and say, well, here's why or why not. I think that person is not TD. They were released to return to work because they didn't have all these things. At least will give you a basis
Mm.
to stand your ground or object, but you always have to consider all medicals, each individually, and take action on those medicals. Let's say you have one QME that says one thing, then you have a subsequent QME for a different body part, which now, that's all the fun in the world that we get to go through again.
Sure.
Um, you need to look at each medical. What do I owe on this medical? What do I owe on that medical? Looking at each medical, we only pay one benefit at a time, but we need to make sure we're paying the right benefit. Who is treating the patient at the time that you're looking at the medical? If, for example, they had an orthopedic injury, but then you bring neurology in, you may bring psych in or something like that.
Mm.
Maybe the orthopedic injury is winding down. It's maybe not MMI, but the person really has substantially recovered. If the psych QME or if the neurologist wants a bunch of tests and they say TD, you need to honor that doctor as well.
Right.
And I see people miss that. It's like, wait a minute, all these different doctors, what do I do with this? Just
Right.
know that you have to look at each individual medical separately and make a decision on that medical.
I think that perspective is so important, not only for audits, but also in defense practice. When we go to the board, for example, if there's a PQME who says someone is temporarily disabled, but that PQME has not received or reviewed all the medicals, but you do have a PTP who's saying someone is permanent and stationary, and guess what? That PTP declares someone at MMI and that you can stop paying TD. The AA may jump to the board and say, well, guess what, Judge? The PQME is saying someone's temporarily disabled. Why is defendant stop paying benefits? But the judge is going to kind of look at things with the same set of eyes that you're saying right now that you do as an auditor. Is they're going to say, well, did both doctors review all the evidence? Yes or no? Well, if I tell the judge, guess what, Judge? One of them did, and one of them is saying they're MMI, then guess what? I'm going to win as a defendant because I've proven that, hey, my reporting is substantial medical evidence. And guess what? AA jumped the gun and they're just relying on something that's not substantial medical evidence. So it's not just a race to the board or a race to who can stop paying benefits. It's more of a, hey, is the proper law and proper evidence being applied here? So, and if you look at it with that set of eyes, you're really limiting your exposure down the road because you're properly applying benefits, and you can stop paying benefits as well if you have all those ducks in a row. So it's not just about paying the applicant more money, it's also about stopping benefits when they can properly be stopped and when they legally should be stopped. So, all you're saying really, Sherri, is a fantastic way of limiting exposure. That's what everyone's goal is on a case is exposure, but also not paying out, but also limiting what you could pay out down the road. So you provided some great experience here, Sherri. It's time for our email segment where we provide insights for the people who keep comp moving. When your email is read on an episode, our client relations team will send over some merch as an appreciation for your submission. Claims examiner Margaret writes, following the recent Rodriguez decision, regardless of whether the defendant previously authorized care in the past, will the defense be able to resume sending new RFAs to UR? Excellent question, Margaret, and thank you for the submission. I should preface that following the recent District Court of Appeals decision, the applicant's attorney in Rodriguez may file a petition for review with the California Supreme Court. So this case may not be over yet. Now, having said that, assuming the second District Court of Appeals decision stands, then yes, Margaret, that would in fact mean defendants can resume sending new RFAs to utilization review, regardless of whether the defendant previously authorized care in the past. Now, Margaret, there are no guarantees in law, especially workers' compensation. I mean, it's not called employers' compensation after all, right? But the post Rodriguez impact will likely lead to less expedited hearings and trials over medical treatment disputes, and in cases where the disputed medical treatment conflicts with the medical guidelines in the medical treatment utilization schedule, that will mean UR is more likely to deny that unnecessary treatment. The lasting impact will be that defendants could save big bucks for unnecessary care that is not supported by medical guidelines. Margaret, thank you for your Comp Corner email. And now back to our guest, Sherri Dozier. Now, Sherri, you've worked with clients all the way through FCA to the appeal. Is that correct?
That's right. I sure have.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, our goal is always to pass par, but there are occasions when, things add up and you don't pass par. First of all, I will tell you, until you get a final par score, do your best not to move on, because the next steps in FCA consider additional files, and you use the par audit score along with the additional file score, and they combine those score to see if you pass the second, I call it the second phase, which is FCA.
Gotcha.
FCA kind of has two parts. It has just reviewing more files for the same, items, compensation due, benefit notices, kind of the flow of the file. And then we go into another phase where they look at cases that have been denied and cases and all of the bills. Do you have the bills in the file? Did you pay them timely? Were they reviewed appropriately? And so that gets into a lot of detail. And I think most companies do a great job at that. But if you give an auditor, an ability to look at every single thing you've ever done, they're going to find something you didn't do right, because that's what claims is about. We're human and we do the best we can, but maybe a bill didn't get paid timely, or maybe this happened or that happened. And so every single time that they find something, that adds to your total score. So it's kind of critical if we can limit things, if we can not get to FCA. That is what our goal is. And I know that every client that I've, helped and talked to, and even examiners, when I talk to them about questions they have, that it's kind of an explanation I give, that you want to avoid FCA. But if you go into FCA, there's arguments that can be given to defend you on the FCA parts. All is not lost. There's even different ways of calculating wage statements if a person is a different type of employee. For example, they work in the construction business. And there's a couple cases that talk about being less than permanent, less than that first category that I told you about before, where it's full-time regular. And so if they're less than that because of the nature of the work, then you may look at all of the hours and or all of the time and the money that they earned and divide it by the weeks that you're counting. And some of the cases say divide it by 52 weeks.
Sure.
So there's different ways you have to look at things, and you have to take case by case. But if you get to a situation in FCA and you have something that looks like it may be something like that, that's when I'd say to give me a call. I have some good information that I would love to share with you, and we've had a lot of successes on applying those cases in the modern day current audits.
I appreciate it, Sherri. How many mock audits have you done approximately in your career?
Oh gosh, 30, probably more than that. I'm trying to take I think more than that, actually.
Gotcha. How about how many times have you looked at a file from, FCA to appeal approximately?
I'm going to say 5.
Okay. So that's
I've
good
looked at
experience.
FCA a lot, but then when you carry it on to appeal,
Hmm.
there's very few. In claims, we don't want to have to appeal.
Sure.
It's not a great process, really. The first part of the process, if you're appealing it, is you go back to actually the audit unit, and the administrative director reviews your responses. And then, the claims department has a second chance, and they can appeal, which that appeal is given to the WCAB.
Hmm.
And, there's a lot of things that you really have to have your ducks in a row. You want to make sure you're doing it for the correct reasons.
Hmm.
And I think that myself and actually our firm try to help
Hmm.
with that. Let's
Right.
look at things realistically. Don't go into an appeal unless you believe you really have something solid legally, because
Hmm.
you're going to have to support your position with a legal position, with a case that makes sense, or, that type of thing. So I think for me to say that I've only had a couple, in fact, I'm not sure. Is this a good time to tell a story about my first one?
I was just going to ask you, this about the early 2000s when you helped a longtime friend?
Yeah, this is about the early
Yeah,
2000s,
this is
and
a perfect
I will
time.
tell you, it was a good experience, shocking at the time. I had a really good friend, I've known her forever, and, you know, this was early on in my time with Bradford Barthel,
Hmm. Hmm.
and, I would go to Tom and say, "Tom, hey, you know my friend or whatever, she needs help through an audit." And I, of course, as a claims person, had been through audits and thought I knew something, right?
Right.
And he says, "Yeah, go do it. Go do it." He's Tom Bradford, with Bradford Barthels, and Don as well. They're always so generous in allowing us to really service clients in the area that they need to be serviced. So
Right.
this is kind of where that began. And so I went in, and I'll tell you, I did what's called maybe a mock audit. I looked at through all the files, gave my opinion, and tried to help correct everything that I could. So thinking, we're in a decent position, um, the auditors came in,
Hmm.
and they started just with what would be the initial part. I don't think it was called necessarily PAR back then, because this was during OBE, which was where the audit unit's named something different now. They had a different perspective. At least that was
Hmm.
my experience. So they went through the files. They found compensation due. They found a different way of doing the wage statement. These are things that we still see now. But they started finding what's called a business practice. And there are a lot of regulations for the auditors when they're seeing a client fall into a business practice. They need to make corrections on that. And I can
Hmm.
see that that's a good point. But this particular audit team, back then, you could have a $400,000 fine for a business practice. And then you also had
Hmm.
additional fines on files, which could be up to $50,000. So they found several business practices. And so the $400,000 started racking up. And then they went to the denied files, and they
Hmm.
decided that out of 17 files, all 17 were bad faith.
Wow.
So I don't know why I knew this or how I knew this, because I'd never done it before. But I actually went to the manager, the audit unit director, and I said, "I want your legal team at the DWC to review this decision." Um, because I said
Hmm.
we had attorneys giving advice, we had sound information. So for this to be said, this is another business practice, $400,000. Let's make sure it's correct. So
Yeah.
that that director, they said, "You know what, we'll do that for you."
Hmm.
And I do think they try to be fair.
Sure.
And I think that when they have legal look at it, legal tries to look at what the law is.
Hmm.
And that's what they did. And from there, they overturned all 17 that the audit unit found were bad faith. And that was a big thing for us. Um, so after you get through that phase, you go into the bill category. You have the denials that I mentioned before,
Hmm.
but then you go into the bill category. For some reason, maybe I would just wear a different set of glasses than the auditor did, but they said they
Thankfully.
could not find 500 bills. That's a lot of bills to not
500.
find.
Yeah, that's a lot.
500.
Yeah.
So it took me 6 months, but I went through all the files and I found that were in the file at the time of the audit, all
Mm,
but 5.
nice.
So my joke with the client is, I think the auditors just made a mistake and added a couple zeros.
Sheesh,
Just
right?
added 2 zeros. They didn't mean to do that. They meant to put 5, but they added it by mistake, of course. They
Right.
added a couple zeros. At the end of the day,
Someone needed to audit that auditor, huh?
well, I think they were going with what they thought was correct. I really
Right.
do. They thought they were doing the right thing. And I think they learned a lot and we learned a lot. And certainly I've taken that with me.
Mm.
But the shocking part about this is because of the business practice penalties and all the substantial penalties that they awarded, they assessed a $1.2 million penalty. And that's a penalty that the insurance company has to pay. And so after spending a year defending, the penalties came down to $56,000
Okay, well, can we
and
repeat that? So, sorry, can we repeat that? So you took it from the
$1.2
penalty
million
down to
to $56,000.
wow. That would be
Um,
that's a on
it
top of
almost
the
sounds
resume thing right there. That's
yeah,
awesome.
it sounds impossible,
Yeah.
but it happened. That was the experience. And I think the best thing about that experience, not just saving the client the money, learning what to do and not to do.
Sure.
Why were they wrong? Why were we correct? Why were we wrong and they were correct? What's the truth of that? We talked earlier about evidence. What is the evidence that we can prove to provide, what's the real answer in that? So it was a great experience. It was a
Yeah.
hard year. And my friend, and we teased the night before the final audit part, we stayed in the hotel. It was right by the her claims operation. And of course, we didn't sleep much, but we had a final meeting with them. And that was the meeting where we were basically able to argue every point we had. It was a very long meeting. And when the auditors came back, when the director came back, they were able to reduce the penalties and the audit stopped. And they didn't come back for 5 years
Wow.
for that
Wow.
claims operation. So that was a good experience. I've had many other experiences where, we've been able to reduce the penalties, and that's always the goal. But the current, audits, I don't see those large penalties. In fact, I
Good.
see less business practices being sought after. I
Good.
think the auditors have gotten better since the early 2000s, and I actually really think the claims departments have gotten a lot better. And so
Win-win.
there's more of them are doing the right things and understanding what that looks like.
No, that's great. I mean, saving from 1.2 million down to 56,000, but
Yeah.
knowing how to thereafter avoid another audits for 5 years is really, really huge. And I think that's one thing that I always appreciate with your wisdom at Bradford and Barthel, Sherri, is how you have the goal of overcoming obstacles that are preventing complex files from moving towards resolution. The joke that I have about you a little bit, and I say this tongue in cheek, but it's actually kind of true, is that you're kind of like the marriage counselor to a difficult file. What do I mean by that is sometimes I get Sherri involved where I have a high exposure case, or someone in our firm, I should say, has a high exposure case, and it's kind of just at a stalemate a little bit, where you have a high exposure case that's been going on for a couple of years. Claims knows it's going on, so does defense counsel. And we have Sherri come in and just kind of give a second set of eyes from a different perspective, right? She's not a defense attorney. She's not really looking at it necessarily through that examiner's lenses, but I think what you bring to the table and really helps get the complex files, gets them resolved, and gets them back on track like a marriage counselor would. Kind of like, hey, look, claims, you have the same goal, right? Defense counsel, you have the same goal. Everyone has the same goal. How can we restart this file to get it towards the mutual goal? So can you tell us how you do that, as far as how you do that here at Bradford and Barthel, Sherri?
Sure. I look at the file from beginning to end. Takes me a little bit of time.
Right.
But my joke is I try to find the needle in the haystack, and 9 times out of 10, really, there is one.
Mm.
And when you get mired down in handling files, you sometimes miss that, as an examiner, or you don't want to believe the truth too. I have 2 sides of that coin, the opposite sides. I think the key is to talk about what is really happening. discuss both, the defense attorney and the client's perspective, bringing that to okay, we both agree on all these things. As we know, when you can agree on things, you're going to make a big progress. But then talking about the reality of what the exposure is. And I bring, from looking at the file from top to bottom, an opinion on it. Just I give food for thought on it, that here's what I'm seeing. If we considered that, what would both of you want to do? And 99.9% of the time, our defense attorneys, they're like, yeah, this is what we want to do. This is what we've been trying to express to the client, that maybe we need a little more money, or maybe no, we need to stick with this issue. But it's just good to know that, let's talk about the issue. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. And I think the examiners and the supervisors and management team who are involved in that decision, when you have that rounded conversation, I really don't do anything special. I just get to participate in a rounded conversation where everybody can look at it and say, yeah, we both have the same goal, and we want to close this. And we don't know that we will prevail if we continue on this aspect. It's a cost analysis, but it's also the right thing to do. So if you're going to do the right thing, you're going to end up closing down your file. You may have an applicant attorney that has a different perspective, but if you have facts and you have evidence on your side and you're coming as a united front, there's a way you're going to be able to resolve it. At least that's been my experience.
Sure. As we say here on Comp Corner, whether you're an auditor, whether you're a judge, whether you're an applicant attorney, claims examiner, defense attorney, lien claimant, whoever, the best file is a closed file. So if you bring anything to the table to jumpstart that process, Sherri, I think everyone wins. As far as, Sherri, your interpretation of Labor Code Section 4650, that's 4650 C4, why is that interesting to you, Sherri?
Well, I brought up something in when I was helping a client through an audit in 21-22. And I'm going back to that because it'll give an example of the difference between then and what I'm seeing now. In 21-22, I had the client that I was working with. They would be on the 14-day cycle, but they would input a check early. And sometimes it would issue early. So the date on the check would not be the 14th day. And in 21-22, that didn't make a difference on the pay cycle. So 4650 deals with pay cycle. And when I was looking at it back then, the auditors from, before 21-22 never had an issue with an examiner, inputting a check early, because I wanted to make sure it was issued timely, and that it happened to issue timely. That happens with out-of-state. Think about out-of-state clients too.
Oh yeah,
their time frames are different. They're trying to make sure they're doing the right thing. So that changed in the last couple years. So now the auditors are finding that the pay cycle is not correct, and you aren't on the 14th day. So some auditors find that you owe a self-imposed penalty, and the pay cycle should have been a different cycle. Some auditors just say that you owe a change of notice benefit because you said in the beginning notice, which is part of 4650, that you were going to issue the checks on Tuesdays. So you didn't issue a check on Tuesday, so maybe you owe a change of benefit notice. Now, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But the interesting thing is on the application. That is my interest. Why is it different now than it was before? I've even gone through, and of course, I'm not an attorney, but I know how to look up cases.
Oh, yeah.
I've gone through and I've found just a couple cases. And what it says is basically consistency. It doesn't talk, about if your check is not dated that 14th day, then you change the benefit cycle, the payment cycle. So I have a level of confusion about those findings, and I'm very interested to see why the application has changed from how it was from the early 2000s until just a few years ago. I think if you, and I'm going to bring up our appellate attorney here, Louis Lars, who's phenomenal, and I had conversations with him about this. What he basically, without giving legal advice or anything, what he basically said is, if a labor code doesn't say that you cannot do something, then that doesn't exist. Now, of course, he's a legal scholar. He would apply it in an appeals way. This is not me giving advice. It's
Sure.
just me saying it piqued my curiosity, because the one thing the labor code doesn't say is that it doesn't say you cannot input the check early, and if it issues, have a penalty. It doesn't say you'd be penalized if you issued a check early. So I think there needs to be a balance on that. How hard is it to get a check dated every 14 days just with the internal going on of a claims department? I think some people can do it, and that's great. And if that's the way it's to be done, that's what I want the clients to be able to do. But I just really want to know, is that the appropriate definition? Is there case law that supports that definition? I haven't found any. And my understanding, and Lewis could speak to this separately, is that he didn't have any real case law that he found either. So that's something that I'm going to keep working on and trying to find the answers on that, because my goal, I'm not a litigator. I'm not going to litigate issues. I don't want the clients to have to litigate issues. What I want the clients to do is know what the right thing is to do. And if they have that information, every client I've worked with really wants to do the right thing. So I'm seeking the answers on that, and I think time will tell how to interpret it. And if the interpretation should have always been what it is, what I'm seeing now, then great. Let's do it the right way, claims operations.
Right.
If it's not, let's look at this realistically. So that's what I'm kind of fascinated with, that whole process.
No, that's a very interesting interpretation, and it's all about limiting exposure. Thank you, Sherri, for sharing your thoughts with us. Now, let's get to know Sherri even better, and there's no better way to do so than 5 in 5. You know the rules. We ask 5-ish questions in 5-ish minutes.
Let's get it started.
Now, Sherri, what's a fashion trend that you previously followed that you now regret?
Maybe the Madonna years. I regret that terribly. Yeah, the Madonna years.
Now, the Madonna years, I can guess it might have been the hair, but I don't want to testify on your behalf. But what specifically about the Madonna years do you regret from the 80s-ish?
Well, she mixed and matched a lot of stuff, and you didn't know what to look at first. And the black lipstick, the heavy makeup, all the good stuff. When you're young, it sounds great, and then you become a older adult, and you're like, what was I thinking? So, yeah, it was fun back then. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, stay tuned for the end, everyone. Sherri sends us pictures that we share at the end. So we're looking forward to seeing that. But it's funny, they say fashion trends are cyclical, right? Let's just keep the Madonna years as a one-time only stand, right?
It's a one-time only. Exactly.
Yeah, my biggest regret was I had a rat tail. If you know, you know. It's also a cousin of the mullet, which my brother, Amir Adil, had. One day, if anyone asks, there are pictures of my brother and I in the early 90s, specifically 1991 through 1993, where I have pictures of my rat tail as well as my brother's mullet. So for those who are interested, please feel free to email us directly. Thank you, Sherri, for your answer. Now, Sherri, if your pet could suddenly talk, what's the first thing they would say about you?
How much they love me.
Aww.
I have a dog named Charlie, and I'm going to tell you, she's my soul dog. She's a golden doodle. And I feel like she's my guide dog, and I'm not blind. So, yeah, she's been, we got her in 2019 from a puppy, and she's about 6. Well, she's actually 6 now. So, yeah, she's a great thing.
Oh, that's very sweet. I am also a now dog lover. I told the story in the previous podcast how I was scared of dogs until I was about 40. Then I got a dog, and I've since become the biggest dog lover there is. My dog, Sydney, would probably say, if she could talk, in human talk at least, she would probably say that I like to walk around, and sometimes I laugh to myself. I sometimes tell stories in my head where I remember things and I suddenly start laughing. My kids make fun of me for that, but hey, I think COVID made us all a little bit little bit less socially acceptable. I think that's one of my weird traits that my dog might look at me and be like, why is that guy randomly smiling and laughing to himself when no one else is talking to him?
I think
Thank
Charlie would tell me. Charlie would tell me that. Yeah, you forgot what you're thinking, mommy. Let me remind you. You thought
There
you
we
were
go.
going into this room, but you were telling me you wanted to go into the other room. So, yeah.
It's guiding you no matter what. That's awesome,
Yeah.
Charlie. Now, Sherri, if you were a kitchen appliance, what would you be and why?
I would probably be a blender.
Ooh, why?
And the reason is because I love to make smoothies. And so, I love to put all the natural ingredients in there, the fruits and the veggies, and a little bit of sweetener to make it taste not terrible. So I'd be a blender.
What are some of your favorite things that you put in your smoothies?
I love strawberries.
Ooh.
I don't mind. It's a weird thing, but I like celery in smoothies.
Mm.
I put a little bit of avocado,
Mm.
and I love the berry category: blueberries, strawberries, sometimes peaches if they're ripe, and you just name it. I've put some lettuces in there. I mean,
Oh,
if I have something in the house and I'm like, this needs to be used, that's probably what I put in the
that's
in the smoothie.
that's expert level smoothies, Sherri. Very impressive, actually. I would like to consider I'd be a fridge. No, not because of my broad shoulders. More of I'd like to consider myself as being underrated, like a fridge is. We only notice the fridge when they go out of service, right? We forget the fact that they keep our food cold literally 24/7. They're also reliable, and I like to think they're steady. But I think those who may know may be laughing right now while they're listening. But the blender is also a great answer. Thank you, Sherri. Now, Sherri, what's the funniest thing that you have said or done during a Zoom call without realizing your mic or camera was on?
Oh wow. Um, there's been a lot of things I've said that I didn't realize my mic or camera were. What's the funniest one? A lot of times I didn't find them funny because I'm like, oops, that. So that was probably the funniest part, is recognizing that I was either talking to myself or carrying on a conversation with someone else that wasn't on the call. So I think that's kind of funny. Maybe talking to my dog would be funny.
There we go. There we go.
Talking to my kids who came into the room when they weren't invited, and so I don't know how funny that is, but that's about you know what happens to me. Someone will come in, and I'll not recognize that I'm in the middle of something there.
Sure. I think we always, unfortunately, tend to learn by making mistakes, and that includes Zoom calls. I tell all our attorneys, look, if you're on a video call with the court or during a depo, always assume your mic is hot because you have to learn the hard way until you put that into effect. Unfortunately, I learned during COVID, I thought my camera was off. I swear my camera was off, but while my camera seemingly was off, I'm eating a chicken drumstick. I don't know what happened, but my camera was on. And next thing I know, I'm getting chatted up saying, hey, how does that chicken taste? I quickly started blushing and I realized, oh boy, I got to get this camera off. So yeah, eating chicken during a Zoom meeting is probably a bad idea, especially if your camera is not off. Now, Sherri, what is the weirdest thing you believed as a child?
Oh gosh, there was a lot of weird thing. I don't think believing in Santa Claus was weird because I still believe in the
There we go.
essence of a person who is good to other people. But
Aw.
and oh, okay. Here's the weirdest thing. This is going to be weird. I used to love, for those of us who are older will know this. I used to believe that I could fly like the
Ah,
flying nun.
there we
Um,
go. Yeah.
and I'd actually have dreams about it. So that's kind of the funniest, weirdest thing that I can remember thinking was true at the time and recognizing, no, I'm making that up.
Well, that was a movie, I think, back in the
It
80s. The
was a it
Flying
was
Nun,
a
is that correct?
series. Yeah,
There
it was
we
a
go.
series. Yeah, it was fun.
That's a cute story. I used to believe that it's almost embarrassing to say this. I used to think alligators lived underneath my bathtub because whenever whenever I was in the tub as a child, you'd always hear like the sound of the water going down. It would be like grr, 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 grr. Of course, that was the sound of water going down the drain. Duh. I thought that was the sound of alligators drinking the water underneath the bathtub. I don't know. Thankfully, when I realized there's not alligators underneath my bathtub, I think that
Wow.
taking showers became much less of a threat. Thankfully, so yeah, I think I'd rather believe in flying nuns than what I foolishly
And
believed. Now, Sherri, you did an exceptional job in the first five. I cannot lie, but I have to ask you: are you ready for a bonus 5 and 5 question?
I'll try to take it on.
All right. Now, it's something of a little controversial that we started the last podcast we had with Fariba Jafari. We asked her a question where I've gotten a lot of bounce back from. Now, what is your favorite carbohydrate? Is it rice, bread, or other, i.e., pasta?
Okay, it's pasta.
Ooh, okay. Pasta. Why is
Yeah, pasta.
interesting? So, okay, pasta's number one. Give us your number two then after pasta. Would it be rice or bread?
Probably bread.
Rice taking the third seed. Interesting. That's a unique answer. I have a theory on the favorite carb decision for many people. I'm going to save that for next podcast. But Sherri with the pasta, the wild card. Thank you for sharing that. That's a
Yeah, pasta
interesting and
has
unique
to have
answer.
bread too. So you gotta, if you're gonna do pasta, you can put a little meat in it, right? So you can justify it, and then you have your garlic bread with it. So it's gotta be the combo.
I think the versatility of the carb, I think that's everyone's kind of favorite. How versatile can it be to your taste preferences? So thank you, Sherri, for sharing. I think, Sherri, your 2-decade plus experience with audits and is second to none. And we also appreciate you joining us on Comp Corner, Sherri. Thanks again. We look forward to having you as a guest in the future.
Pleasure to be here.
For CE credit information, please check out the show notes, which have a link to the CE credit form, or send an email to compcorner@bradfordbarthel.com for the CE credit link. Thank yous all around to Amir and Tammy for producing our episode. Please check our show notes to send in your Comp Corner questions. Thank you very much again to Sherri Dozier for joining. We look forward to all of you joining us next time on Comp Corner.